So Danny, the Chanuka story really starts over kind of 3 generations of kings. So the first is Antiochus III. Antiochus III was the king of the Syrian Empire from 222 BCE to 186 BCE. He was really a friend of the Jews. He got on with the Jews. There was nothing wrong going on. And even before that, how did the connection with the Holy Land and the Jews happen? He won a war against an Egyptian king. And in that, he was able to win and annex the Holy Land and Jerusalem as the capital, obviously, of the Holy Land. He didn't have a difficult relationship with the Jewish people, but then his son, once he died, took over. And he started to put tax on the people of the Holy Land after losing a war. And so somebody came to this king, Antiochus' son, and said, hey, by the way, do you know in the Jewish temple, in the Jewish people's temple, they collect half a shekel coin. Every man brings half a shekel coin, shekel being the different monetary, however you call it, like the dollar, right? Half a dollar, half a shekel, in order to buy the korbanot, the sacrifices in the temple. This king, Antiochus' son, I can't say his name, I'm sorry about that, Seleucus the Fourth. So he says, wow, that'd be a real great way to pay back taxes that I owe to the Romans for losing the war. That's where the negativity starts to come in. He sends people into the temple to take that money away. Now that money was there to run the temple, to bring the sacrifices. So that started already a difficult and bad relationship with the Jewish people. He then dies, and his brother Antiochus IV comes in. And this is where the negativity comes in between the Jewish people and the Syrian rulers. Not only is there a physical rule over the Jewish people in the Holy Land, there is something called Hellenism, which I remember us discussing. Hellenism is really the idol worship of physicality. Now, the Jewish people, one of the special things about us is that we are constantly, in order to serve God, we serve God by connecting the spiritual to the physical. We do a physical act that has a spiritual connection, and that's how we serve God. Now, Hellenism says, forget the spirituality. We actually worship physicality. We worship our bodies. This is something that Yochanan, one of the high priests of the Jewish people, is rejecting because he knows it's totally against what we stand for. They then start bringing in rules like not being able to keep the Shabbat, the Sabbath, no circumcision, the learning of Bible, of Torah, and teaching of Torah. And one of the worst things was they took away the role of the high priest, Yochanan, and the high priests that were the spiritual leaders of the Jewish people. This is where it gets really interesting. Yochanan dies. In fact, he's assassinated. And Matityahu, who was also a priest, lived in an area called Modi'in. He was fired a few years before, and he was hanging out in this place called Modi'in. Now the king sends people to this Matityahu, and they build an altar, and they force him, or they try and force him to sacrifice to an idol, and he obviously says, absolutely not, I will not do such a thing. He knows that the reporters are going to go back to the king, and this is the end of his life. So he brings his sons together, and before his death, he says, you need to fight the great Syrian army. And he puts in charge of the battles Judah the strong, Yehudah HaMaccabi, and they start to defend themselves against 40,000 Syrian soldiers. This is a physical battle that goes on. And the Jews, led by the high priests, which are the spiritual leaders, they become physical leaders, physical fighters, and they take on this grand army through guerrilla warfare and obviously God's blessing. And they win. And they defeat the Syrian Greek army. They then run to Jerusalem in 139 BCE. They take the idols out of that temple, they clean it up, and they begin to search for pure oil to light the candelabra, the menorah, that is a sign of God's light shining in this world. That's the beginning of the story of Chanuka.